The signature line. For 11 years, I thought I was a partner in my father's company. It turned out I was a line item. That's the sentence I keep coming back to. The one I finally said out loud to my husband in our kitchen while the coffee went cold in my hands, because saying it plainly was the only way I could make it stop echoing. 11 years. I gave that company my 20s and most of my 30s. I gave it the good back I used to have and the marriage I almost lost and the friends who eventually stopped calling because I was always at the shop. And the whole time I believed the word my father used at Thanksgiving, at the bank, at the golf course, with men whose names I'll never forget. Partner. He'd put his hand on my shoulder and say it like it meant something. This is my daughter. We run it together. Partners. The paperwork never once used that word. Not one page. I just never had a reason to read the paperwork. Because why would you audit a promise you'd bet your life on? Let me start where it actually started. Because if I only tell you about the end, you'll think I was a fool. And maybe I was. But I want you to understand how a reasonable person ends up believing something for over a decade. I want you to understand it the way I finally had to. My name is Nora, and I'm the middle of three. My older sister Dana was the smart one. That's not me being bitter, it's just the label our house ran on. Dana was the smart one, and I was the reliable one, and my younger brother Marcus was the baby, which in our family was its own kind of permanent job title. Those roles got assigned early, and they never came up for review. You didn't get to change what you were. You just got better at being it. My father built Halloran fixtures and fabrication out of a two-bay garage in 1988. Commercial fixtures, mostly the metal shelving and display units and counters that go into grocery stores and pharmacies and the kind of hardware stores that still exist in small towns. It's not glamorous. Nobody dreams about walk-in cooler racks. But it's real. It's needed. And for a long time, it was good money if you were willing to work the way my father worked, which was all the time, with a kind of grim pride that made rest look like a character flaw. I started sweeping the shop floor when I was 9, not for pay for what my father called learning the value of things. Dana never swept a floor in her life, and that was fine, because Dana had grades, and grades were the family's stock portfolio. Marcus didn't sweep either, because Marcus was 7 and cute and, as the years went on, because Marcus was Marcus. And asking Marcus to do something reliably was like asking the weather to cooperate. So, it was me on the broom, me stacking the offcuts, me at 14 learning to read a cut list, at 16 running the panel saw when the regular guy was out sick, at 18 turning down the state school I'd been accepted to because Dad said he needed me, and I couldn't think of a single acceptable reason to tell him no. I want to be honest with you here, because I promised myself I would. Part of me wanted to be needed. That's the thing nobody tells you about being the reliable one. It's not entirely a prison they build around you. You help build it too, brick by brick. Because every time somebody leans on you, it feels like love. And if leaning is the only love you've been offered, you start to want people to lean harder. So I stayed. I told myself and everyone else that I was getting in on the ground floor of something. Dad said it too. You stick with me, he told me the summer I turned 19. Both of us covered in metal dust. The shop radio playing that classic rock station he never changed. And someday, this is yours, ours, you and me. He had a way of saying things like that at exactly the moment you were too tired to question them. I believed him the way you believe a thing you need to be true. For a few years, it even felt like it might be. As I got into my mid-20s, I stopped being the kid on the floor and started being the one customers asked for. I was good with them better than my father, honestly, though I'd never have said so. Dad could build anything, but he could also lose an account by being right too loudly. I was the one who smoothed it over. I remembered the grocery chain buyer's daughter's name. I knew which contractor needed to be called back within the hour or he'd walk, and which one was all bluster and would wait. I learned the vendors. I learned which steel supplier would float us 30 days when cash was tight, and which one would cut us off the second an invoice went past due. Those relationships were mine. I built them. I nursed them along through late nights and apology lunches and the kind of patient attention that doesn't show up on any spreadsheet. By the time I was 30, I was effectively running the daily operation. My father had shifted into the role of founder at large, which mostly meant he came in late, held court with the old-timers, made a few decisions that I would then quietly spend the afternoon managing the fallout from, and left early. I ran the quotes. I ran the scheduling. I did the hiring and, twice, the firing, which is a thing my father physically could not make himself do, and never once thanked me for doing. I was the one the crew came to. I was the one who knew where every dollar was. And I was fine with all of it, because I believed it was building towards something that had my name on it too. The first time I gave real money to the business, my own money, not just my labor, I was 31. We'd taken on a big install for a regional pharmacy chain, the kind of job that could put us on the map or bury us depending on how it went. And about halfway through, one of our subcontractors went under and left us exposed. We needed to cover materials to keep the job moving, or we'd blow the deadline and eat a penalty that would have hurt for years. Dad came to me in the office. I remember he closed the door first, which he never did, and his voice changed. That's a detail I'd learn to watch for later. The way his voice would go soft and warm right before he asked for something. "Sweetheart," he said, "I hate to even bring this to you." He had 11 grand of my savings out of me by the end of that conversation. My wedding someday money. My down payment someday money. He called it a bridge. He said, "You'll get it back with interest, and anyway, it's going right back into your own future, isn't it? It's all the same pot. It's all the same pot." I held on to that phrase for years like it was a legal document. I got the 11,000 back, eventually, in pieces some of it, and stopped counting because counting felt small and disloyal. That was the pattern setting itself. The lesson I absorbed wasn't, "Be careful with your father." The lesson I absorbed was, I am the one who can be counted on when it matters. And God help me, I was proud of it. Let me tell you about Dana, because you can't understand my family without understanding how the sun rose and set on my sister. Dana was genuinely bright. I'll give her that with a full heart. She went to a good school, got a degree in something with the word communications in it, and moved to the city, where she has spent her adult life having what my mother describes as so much on her plate. Dana's plate is a marvel of engineering. It has been full for 20 years, and yet nothing has ever actually been on it. She had jobs that were always about to become important. She had a boyfriend who was going to change everything and then didn't, and then a husband who was going to change everything and then left, and through all of it she remained. In the eyes of my parents, the accomplished one, the one who got out, the one whose visits home were treated like state occasions. When Dana came home, my mother cooked for 2 days. When I came home, and I lived 20 minutes away, so I came home constantly, I got a, "There's leftovers in the fridge if you want them." I noticed this. I want you to know I noticed it the whole time. I wasn't blind. I just filed it under the general unfairness of families, the kind of thing you're supposed to be mature enough to shrug off. "You know how your sister is," my mother would say, and somehow that explained everything and excused everything all at once. Marcus the baby was a different kind of problem. Marcus was charming and useless in roughly equal measure. He'd worked at the shop off and on over the years, mostly on, in the sense that he was on the payroll, and off, in the sense that he was rarely actually there. Dad kept him employed because Dad could not conceive of a version of the world in which his son didn't have a job at his company. Even a son who showed up at 10:30 smelling like the night before and left at 3. I covered for Marcus more times than I can count. I redid his work. I calmed the customers he'd annoyed. When he crashed a company truck at 26, no injuries, thank God. But he'd been drinking. And if it had gone on record, it would have ended his license and probably sent our insurance into orbit. I was the one who drove out at midnight, dealt with it, made the calls, and made it quietly go away. Dad's response was to clap me on the back and say, "That's why I've got you." Marcus's response was to not speak to me for a week, as if I'd embarrassed him by rescuing him. So that's the shape of the family? My father, the founder, who loved me in the specific way a man loves a reliable tool genuinely, but also without ever really seeing it as a thing with feelings. My mother, who managed all our reputations like a full-time job and who deployed sweetness the way other people deploy a credit card, only ever right before a purchase. Dana, the son. Marcus, the pet. And me, the reliable one, the fixer. The one with the good hands and the good relationships and the savings account everyone treated as a shared utility. I got married at 33. His name is Sam, and marrying him is the single smartest thing I have ever done. Though it took me embarrassingly long to fully understand why. Sam saw my family clearly from about the third dinner. He never said anything cruel. He'd just get quiet on the drive home, and I learned that his quiet meant he was seeing something I wasn't ready to see. "Your dad talks about the business like it's yours," he said once, early on. "But he doesn't ask you anything. He tells you." I didn't have an answer for that, so I turned up the radio. The wedding itself was small. Sam's family covered most of it, and I was fine with that. I didn't need a big thing. But there's a moment from it that I think about now. At the reception, my father gave a toast. He'd had a couple of drinks and he got emotional, the way he did about the business, but almost never about people, and he raised his glass and said, this is my right hand, my partner. Halloran Fixtures wouldn't be Halloran Fixtures without her." Everyone clapped. Sam squeezed my hand under the table, and I sat there glowing like an idiot, because there it was again, the word, said out loud, in front of 100 people. Partner. Words are cheap. I know that now. But when you're starving, you'll live off the smell of food for a long, long time. The second big thing, the one that started the crack, though I didn't know it was a crack until much later, was my father's heart. He had a cardiac event at 64. Not a massive one, but serious enough for a stent and a stay in the hospital, and a long, slow, frightening recovery. And here is what happened to the business the moment my father went into that hospital. Nothing. Nothing happened to the business. The doors stayed open. The jobs got done. The customers got their fixtures. The vendors got paid. The crew got their checks. And the reason nothing happened is that I was there, at 4 a.m, some nights, running the entire company by myself, while also driving to the hospital every day, because someone had to. And Dana had so much on her plate, and Marcus, in a crisis, had all the utility of a chocolate teapot. For 6 weeks I basically didn't sleep. Sam says it was closer to 2 months. I did the work of the business, and I did the work of being the daughter at the hospital, and I did the work of managing everyone else's feelings about my father's health, which is its own exhausting job in a family like mine. Dana would call me, not Dad, to process her anxiety about Dad, and I would sit in the shop parking lot in the dark listening to my sister cry about our father while I was the one who'd been at his bedside that morning. I never said that. I just listened. That's what the reliable one does, when Dad got better. When he came back to the shop, moving slower but himself again, he looked around at the place still standing and running and profitable. And do you know what he said? He said, "See, I knew it'd be fine." As if it had been fine on its own. As if the fine had simply occurred, weather-like, and not been held together with my 2 hands and my sleepless nights. He never asked how I'd done it. It didn't occur to him to ask, because in his understanding of the world, I was the mechanism by which things got fine, and you don't thank the mechanism. You just expect it to work. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that the not thanking was just his way, that men of his generation didn't say those things, that the real thank you was the partnership, the future, the someday this is yours. I was very good at telling myself things. Around this time, the money got tangled up in a new way, and this is the part I'm least proud of, so I'll just say it straight. When Dad was recovering, we refinanced some things to keep cash flow steady. I put my name on a business line of credit. I signed personally. I did it without really reading it. At the kitchen table, my father's pen still warm, my mother hovering with that sweet voice. You're so good at this. We'd be lost without you. And Sam not there. Because if Sam had been there, he'd have read every page and asked every question, and I would have been annoyed at him for slowing things down. I signed because signing was what I did. I was the one who made things fine. A signature was just another form of the broom. That line of credit is going to matter later. Remember it. The years after that were the good years and the sick years at the same time. The way it goes. The business did well. We grew. We took on bigger accounts. I brought in a hospitality client, a restaurant group that was opening locations all over the region entirely on the strength of a relationship I'd built with their operations director over 3 years of returned calls and honored promises, and one very specific instance where I personally drove a replacement counter 200 miles overnight so their flagship location could open on time. That account alone nearly doubled our revenue. It was mine. Everyone knew it was mine. My father took the operations director to lunch exactly once, near the beginning, and told the story for years afterward as if he'd landed the whole thing himself over a steak. I let him. I want you to understand that I actively let him take credit over and over, because I'd decided that credit didn't matter to me, that I was above it, that the reliable one doesn't need applause. What a beautiful lie that was. The truth was, I was terrified. Somewhere underneath all that noble self-effacement was a small, scared person who believed, correctly, as it turned out, that her entire value to her family was her usefulness, and if you build your whole worth on being useful, you can't ever afford to ask for credit. Because asking for credit is admitting you want something for yourself, and wanting something for yourself is the one thing the reliable one is never allowed to do. Sam saw all of this. He'd started saying things by then, gently but more often. You're not a partner if you can't see the books whenever you want, he said one night. And I said, I can see the books whenever I want. And he said, when did you last look? And I couldn't remember. And I got defensive. And we had one of those fights that isn't really about the thing it's about. Because the thing he was really saying was, they don't respect you the way you think they do. And I don't want you to find that out the hard way. And the thing I was really saying back was, please don't make me look, because I'm afraid of what's there. And if it's bad, then everything I've built my life on is a lie. And I'm not strong enough to know that yet. We had a daughter, then a son. My kids. The reason I did any of it, or so I told myself. And having kids changed something in me slowly, not all at once. Not in a lightning strike way, but the way water changes stone. Because I started looking at my daughter, this fierce little person who assumed the whole world owed her a good answer to every question, and I started thinking, I would never do to her what was done to me. I would never assign her a role and lock the door. I would never take her for granted and call it love. And then, some nights, driving home from the shop with cold coffee in the cup holder, a quieter thought would arrive. So why do you let them do it to you? I didn't have an answer, but the question stopped going away. The third thing, the one that really tightened the screw, was my grandmother's house, and it happened the year I turned 40. My grandmother, my father's mother, passed away that spring. She was 91, and it was peaceful, And the grief was the kind that's mostly gratitude. She'd owned a modest house across town, nothing fancy, but paid off and worth a real amount of money, and she had also, in her last years, come to depend heavily on family. And when I say family, I mean me and Sam. We were the ones who took her to appointments. We were the ones who sat with her. My kids knew her. Dana's kids had met her maybe 4 times. Marcus visited when he needed to borrow the truck she kept in the garage. Sam cooked for her every Sunday for 3 years. I fixed her gutters, her water heater, her porch step, her everything. So when the estate got sorted, I'll admit I had a quiet, shameful little hope. Not that I'd get the house, I didn't need the house, but that somewhere in the settling of things, someone would say, out loud, in front of the others, that I had shown up. That the years of Sundays would be named. That's all. I wanted it named. Instead, the house was sold, and the proceeds were split 3 ways: Dana, Marcus, and me, because that was fair. And fairness in my family always meant treating unequal contributions as if they were equal, so long as I was the one who'd contributed more. Nobody mentioned the Sundays. My mother, at the meeting where this was all decided, actually said to Dana, "Your grandmother would have wanted you to have a little something. I know you've had a hard year." Dana had had, by that point, roughly her 20th consecutive hard year. And when the check came, and it was split evenly 3 ways, Marcus's arrived first because Marcus needed his fastest. And he texted the family group chat a photo of a new watch he'd bought with it. And everyone sent little heart reactions. And I sat there and thought, I helped that man's grandmother into the bathroom. I held her hand in the hospital. And here is a watch. I didn't say anything. Of course I didn't. I'm the reliable one. But that night Sam found me sitting in the dark in the kitchen, and he didn't turn on the light. He just sat down across from me and put his hand flat on the table, near mine, not touching, just near. And he said, "You know they're never going to see it, right? However much you give, there's no amount that turns into being seen." And I said, "I know." And I meant it, and I did nothing about it, because knowing a thing and being able to act on it are 2 different countries, and I didn't have a passport yet. Here's where it turns. Here's the part I'd rewind 100 times if I could not to change it, but because I finally understand it. That autumn, my father decided it was time to formalize the succession. His words. He'd been rattled by the heart thing and by his mother's death, and he'd started using words like estate planning and legacy, and he told me with real warmth that we were going to get everything set up properly so that the business would pass to me cleanly when the time came. Partner to owner, he said, doing it right. He'd hired a lawyer, a woman named Prentice, with an office in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax place, and there'd be paperwork, and I should come by and sign what needed signing. I was moved by it. I'll be honest. After everything, the fact that he was finally, formally putting it in writing, it landed on the exact bruise I'd been protecting for 20 years. Someday this is yours was becoming a document. I called Sam from the parking lot before the first meeting, and I could hear in my own voice how much I wanted it to be real. He said, "Read everything. Please. Promise me you'll actually read it this time." And I promised. And I meant to. But here's what happened at Prentice's office. There was a stack of documents an inch thick, and my father was there, and my mother, and it was all very warm and businesslike, and Prentice walked us through it in that fast, confident lawyer voice that makes reading feel redundant. Like the document is being read to you, so why would you also read it yourself? And every few pages there was a little tab that said "Sign here," and my father was signing his, and it felt, in the room, with everyone watching, like reading each page would be an insult. Like it would say, "I don't trust you," to a man who was at last giving me the thing I'd waited 20 years for. So I signed, fast, in the warmth of the room, and the momentum of the pen. I skimmed. I caught words like operating agreement and membership interest and buy-sell, and I let them slide past because Prentice said they were standard, and my father nodded and my mother beamed, and it was, God help me, a nice afternoon. We went to lunch after. My father ordered a drink even though his cardiologist would have killed him, and he toasted me again, the right hand, the partner, and I let the whole thing wash over me like the warm bath I'd been wanting my whole life. I didn't read it that day, or the next week. The signed copies went into a folder that went into a drawer in my home office, and I told myself I'd go through them properly when things slowed down, which is a thing I have been telling myself since 1997. What made me finally read them was small and stupid and had nothing to do with suspicion. It was almost a year later. I was applying for something, a home equity thing. We were thinking about renovating, adding a room as the kids got bigger, and the bank wanted documentation of my assets and business interests. Routine. Boring. I went to the drawer to pull my ownership documents, feeling for the first time in my life the small, clean pride of a person who owns a piece of something real, ready to photocopy my partnership and hand it over as proof of who I was. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder. It was evening. The kids were asleep. Sam was reading on the couch in the next room. There was a half-full mug of coffee I'd microwaved twice and still not finished, the way I do. The kitchen light over the table is one of those warm yellow ones that makes everything look older than it is. And I started, for the first time, to actually read. I read the operating agreement of Halloran Fixtures and Fabrication, LLC. And I could not find myself in it. I read it again, slower, thinking I'd missed a page. The members of the LLC were listed. My father held the majority, and the remaining interest, the part I had assumed, for a year since that warm afternoon at Prentice's office, was mine, was held in a trust. My father's trust. The document I had signed, the one with all the little sign here tabs, the one Prentice had read to me in her confident voice, was not making me a partner. It was the opposite. Buried in the standard language, in a section I'd skim past because it had a boring heading, was the mechanism by which my father consolidated full control and set up the succession, and the succession did not pass the business to me. It passed the business, on my father's death, into the trust, to be divided among his 3 children. Equally. Equally. The word from my grandmother's estate. The word that always meant, I get nothing extra for everything extra I gave. I had signed a document that turned my 20 years of labor and my personal loan guarantee, and my relationships, and my sleepless hospital nights into a 1/3 share of a company I had effectively built, to be received someday, on my father's death, alongside my sister who had never swept the floor, and my brother who had crashed the truck. And worse, because there's always a worse, the buy-sell provisions and the management terms meant that even that 1/3 didn't come with control. My father had structured it so that Dana, the smart one, the one who'd gotten out, would be a co-trustee. Dana would have a say in the business she had never worked a day in, and I, who ran it, would have my 1/3 and my labor and my name on that line of credit. I sat there. I want to tell you I felt rage, but I didn't. Not first. First I felt embarrassed. That's the honest sequence. My first emotion was a hot flush of shame, the specific humiliation of a woman who has just discovered she's been the last to understand something about her own life. I'd been calling myself a partner for years. To customers, to vendors, to myself. And the paperwork, the boring, standard, read to me in a confident voice paperwork, had quietly explained my real role the whole time, and I'd been too afraid to read it. Then came the denial, fast on shame's heels. I thought, I'm misreading this. I'm not a lawyer. This is standard language. Prentice said so. Dad wouldn't. Dad said partner, he said it at my wedding, he said it in front of the bank. There's an explanation. I even started, in my head, constructing the explanation for him, doing the thing I always did. The reflexive work of making my father make sense. I called Prentice the next day. I made an appointment, told her it was routine, and I sat in that strip mall office between the nail salon and the tax place, and I asked her, as neutrally as I could, to walk me through my ownership. And she did. And she was perfectly pleasant about it, and perfectly clear. And it was exactly what I'd read. When I asked carefully whether I was a partner, whether I had any ownership stake independent of the trust, whether there was any recognition in the documents of my role in operating the company, she looked at me with what I can only describe as mild professional pity and said, "Your father's the sole member currently. The structure passes his interest to the trust for the benefit of his 3 children equally. You're the operations manager, per your employment agreement." Operations manager. "There's a bonus structure in there," she added helpfully, "tied to performance." As if that were a gift. I remember driving home from that meeting, and it was the quietest drive of my life. I didn't turn the radio on. I didn't call Sam. I just drove. 25 minutes. And I let the thing be true for the first time. Operations manager. Not a partner. Never a partner. A very well-liked, extremely reliable, personally guaranteeing the debt operations manager, who would inherit a third of what she built alongside the 2 people who'd built none of it, if her father died. And not 1 minute before. The proof wasn't a dramatic thing. That's what I keep telling people who expect this story to have a smoking gun, a cruel text, a caught red-handed moment. It wasn't like that. The proof was a stack of documents I had signed myself, in good faith, that simply and legally described a relationship completely different from the one I'd believed in for 2 decades. Nobody had lied to me in writing. That's the part that took me longest to sit with. The betrayal wasn't a lie. The betrayal was that the truth had been sitting in a drawer the whole time, and everyone who loved me had been comfortable letting me believe the beautiful version, because the beautiful version kept me working. When I got home, Sam took one look at me and put the kids in front of a movie and sat me down. I showed him the documents. He read them the way he reads everything, slowly, his finger moving, and I watched his face and I saw him understand it before I'd finished explaining. And then I saw something in him that scared me a little, because Sam doesn't get angry often, but when he does, it's a cold, still thing. He set the pages down and he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, very evenly, "He had you sign away your own claim. He had you sit there and sign it and call it a gift." And I said, "I signed it. Nobody forced me. I didn't read it." And he said the thing I'll never forget. He said, "You didn't read it because you couldn't afford to know." And they counted on that. That's when it stopped being about the paperwork. The next few weeks were the worst and the most clarifying of my life, and they were also, from the outside, completely uneventful. I want to be truthful about the shape of this, because the stories people tell about family betrayal always jump straight to the confrontation, and real life doesn't. Real life is you going to work the next morning, and the morning after that, and running the company for a father who structured you out of it, and smiling at the crew, and returning the vendor's call, and quoting the job, all while a slow tectonic thing shifts underneath you. I went through everything. I went through anger, finally, in the second week, a deep, tired anger that didn't have anywhere to go. I went through grief, which surprised me, because I hadn't expected to mourn, but I did. I mourned the father I'd invented, the one who meant partner when he said it. I went through a strange guilt at myself for being upset, because a voice in my head that sounded exactly like my mother kept saying, "It's your family. They didn't mean it like that. Family helps family. Why are you keeping score?" And I went through fear, real fear, the coldest one, which was this: if I'm not the reliable one, what am I? If I stop being useful to them, is there anything left of me that they'll want? Because for 40 years, Being needed was the only currency I'd ever been paid in, and I didn't know if I existed without it. I did the thing you do. I looked for the innocent explanation one more time. I told myself maybe Dad didn't understand the documents either. Maybe Prentice set it up in some standard way, and Dad just signed what he was told, same as me. And I actually believed that for a few days, and it was almost comforting, until I remembered something. I remembered that a couple of years back, before all this, my father had said something at a family dinner that I'd let float right past me at the time. Dana had made some comment about the business, some opinion about a decision I'd made, and I'd bristled a little, and my father had said, easily, warmly, to smooth it over, Now, it's all going to be split fair when I'm gone. Everybody gets their share. So everybody gets a say. Everybody gets a say. I'd heard it as a nice sentiment about family harmony. It had been, I understood now, a statement of the actual plan. He'd told me. He'd told me at the dinner table between the bread and the pot roast, and I hadn't heard it, because I hadn't been able to afford to hear it. He knew. That was the thing I finally had to accept. My father knew exactly what he'd built, and he'd let me call myself a partner for years, in front of customers and at my own wedding, because it cost him nothing and it kept his best worker loyal and cheap. And here's the part that hollowed me out. I don't even think he thought of it as cruel. I don't think he sat up at night pleased with his cleverness. I think, in his mind, it was fair. 3 kids, 3 shares. What could be more fair? The fact that one kid had given her whole life and the other 2 had given nothing simply didn't enter into his math. Because in his world, I was the mechanism that made things fine. And you don't give the mechanism a bigger share. You just keep it oiled with warm words at Thanksgiving. Sam kept asking me what I was going to do. And for a while my answer was nothing. I don't know, let me think. Which was really I'm scared. Because doing something meant a confrontation, and confrontation was the one thing the reliable one is never supposed to need. My whole identity was built on not needing things. Asking for what was fair physically felt, like a violation of the person I'd trained myself to be. But then something small happened, and it broke the last of it. We had a big job come up. The hospitality client, my client, the restaurant group, they were opening their biggest location yet, and they wanted a full custom fit-out, the largest single order in the history of the company. It was going to be a huge amount of money and a huge amount of work, and it needed my relationship with the operations director to close, and my knowledge to execute, and probably another few weeks of me sleeping at the shop. My father came to me about it, and his voice did the thing. It went soft and warm. He closed the office door, and he said, "Sweetheart, this is the big one. This could set us up for years. I need you all in on this, the way only you can be." And then, in the same breath, without a pause, because he genuinely did not see the 2 thoughts as connected. "And listen, while you're in there this quarter, Marcus is going to start sitting in on the client meetings. Time he learned the relationship side. And Dana's got some ideas about the branding. She's going to want to call with your client's people." Your client. He even called it that. And then he wanted me to hand it to them. I understood, standing in that office with the door closed, and my father's warm voice and the shop radio playing the same station it had played since I was 19, that this was the whole thing in miniature. I would do the work. I would carry the risk. My name would stay on the debt. And the credit, the relationship, the future, those would be distributed equally to the smart one and the baby, so everybody got a say. So it was all fair. I didn't yell. I want to be clear that there was no scene. I've read about people who finally snap and deliver the speech. And I didn't do that. Partly because I'm not built that way, and partly because I'd learned that a speech is just one more performance for people who only ever watched me perform. What I did was much quieter, and it took me another 2 weeks to do, and I did it cold and sober and sure. I met with my father, alone, at the shop. After everyone had gone home, I'd asked him to stay. He thought it was about the big job. I brought the folder, and I put the operating agreement on the desk between us, under that same yellow light, and I said, "I read this." He looked at it, and then at me, and I watched him decide how to play it, and I saw. This is the part that still hurt. I saw him choose warmth. He smiled a little, and he said, "Course you did. It's all in order. Prentice did it right." And I said, "I'm not a partner." Not a question. And my father spread his hands and gave me the line, the exact line, the family line. "You're my daughter. It's all going to you kids. What's more fair than that?" And I said quietly, "Dana and Marcus didn't build this." And here is where he did the thing families do, the thing that's worse than yelling. He didn't get angry. He got hurt. He got wounded. This 70-year-old man with the stent in his heart. And he said, "Is that what this is about? Money? After everything? You're going to keep score now? Why are you keeping score?" There it was. The oldest weapon in the drawer. He looked genuinely betrayed by me. And the horrible thing is that some part of me, the 40-year-old reliable one, immediately started to apologize, started to make it fine, started reaching for the broom. I didn't pick up the broom. I said, and my voice was shaking, "I'll admit that, but I said it. I'm not keeping score, Dad. I'm just done keeping the books for a game I didn't know I was losing." And I told him what I'd decided. I told him I was stepping back from the operations, not quitting in a blaze. I'm not cruel. And I wouldn't torch the crew's livelihoods over my own wound, but stepping back. I would stay through the transition of the big job because I'd given my word to my client. But after that, my father would need to either bring Marcus and Dana in for real, all the way, to actually run the thing they were going to inherit a share of, or hire someone to do what I'd been doing. Either way, I was taking my name off that line of credit. I was done being the personal guarantee. I was done being the mechanism. He didn't beg. I want you to know that because the stories always end with begging, and mine didn't. He got quiet, and then he got a little cold himself, and he said, "You'll regret this. This is your family." And I said, "I know it's my family. That's why it took me 20 years. And I left. I drove home. I didn't turn on the radio. And this time, the quiet wasn't grief. This time, the quiet was room. The first empty room I'd had inside myself in as long as I could remember, and I didn't rush to fill it. The consequences were not a movie. Let me tell you what actually happened, because I think the honest version matters more than the satisfying one. My mother called me the next day, using the sweet voice, and when the sweet voice didn't work, she used the wounded voice, and when that didn't work, she stopped calling for a while, which was its own answer. There was a family dinner I wasn't warmly invited to and didn't attend. Dana sent a long message in the group chat about how we're a family and we need to communicate. That was, when you decoded it, entirely about how my setting a boundary was an act of aggression against her. Marcus said nothing, because Marcus never says anything unless he needs the truck. I finished the big job, I closed it, I executed it, I delivered it, and it was the best work of my career, and I did it knowing it was the last thing I'd build under my father's name. And there was a strange peace in that. My client, the operations director, the relationship I'd built over years when I told him I was moving on from Halloran, he didn't hesitate. He said, "Wherever you land, we follow you." It was always you. That was worth more than any toast my father ever gave. Because here's what my father didn't understand about the difference between owning a thing and being a thing. He owned the company, but I was the relationships, and relationships don't transfer with a signature. Within 6 months of my stepping back, the wheels didn't come off dramatically, but they wobbled. Marcus, given real responsibility for the first time, was exactly as reliable as he'd always been. Dana, given her say, had opinions but no willingness to be at the shop at 6 a.m. when a truck didn't start. Two of my key vendor relationships cooled because the one who remembered their kids' names and floated the goodwill was gone. A couple of accounts drifted. My father hired a replacement operations manager at a salary that, I later heard, was nearly double what I'd been paid. And even at that price, the man lasted 8 months. Because it turns out the job I'd been doing for the price of wormwords was actually 2 jobs. And nobody does 2 jobs for love unless they've been trained since they were 9 to believe love is the same as being useful. The company survived. I want to be clear about that. I didn't destroy anything, and I'm glad I didn't. It's smaller now, and it runs harder for less, and it's fine in the real sense of the word. The sense my father never understood the fine that requires someone to hold it together. It just isn't me holding it anymore. I started my own thing. Nothing grand. A consulting and fabrication brokerage, my name on the door, my relationships as the entire asset. My client came with me. Others followed. It's mine actually, legally, in the paperwork that I now read every single word of. Mine. Sam does the books. I sleep at home. My daughter, the fierce one, came to the little office I rent and looked at the sign with my name on it and asked if it was really mine, all of it. And I got to say yes. Just yes. No trust. No equal thirds. No everybody gets a say. Mine, and someday, if she wants it, hers, clean and clearly, in writing, with nothing hidden in a boring section she'll be afraid to read. My father and I speak now, a little. We're not estranged exactly. I go to the big holidays. I'm cordial. I ask about his heart and I mean it. But something is permanently different and we both know it, and neither of us says it. He knows I read the paperwork. He knows I know what my real role was. And I've made my peace with the fact that he will probably never say the word he owes me, which isn't partner, and isn't sorry, it's thank you. The real one. The one that admits I was a person and not a mechanism. He won't say it. I've stopped standing at the door, waiting for it. That's the freedom. Not that they changed. They didn't change. The freedom is that I stopped needing them to. Sam asked me not long ago if I was angry still, and I thought about it honestly, the way he'd taught me to, and I said no, not angry. What I feel is closer to the way you feel about a house you grew up in after you've moved out, a little tender, a little sad. Glad you're not there anymore. The wound didn't heal because they apologized. It healed because I finally understood that their inability to see me was never a puzzle I could solve by being more useful. There was no amount. Sam was right, in the dark kitchen, years ago. There was never any amount that turned into being seen. The only person who could see me was me, and I'd been the last one in line, waiting for everyone else to look first. I keep the operating agreement in a drawer still. Not out of bitterness, I just keep it. Every so often, I take it out and look at the little sign here tabs and my own signature, 40 years old and confident and completely uninformed, and I don't feel humiliated by it anymore. I feel something closer to tenderness for that woman, the one who signed fast in a warm room because she wanted so badly to finally be given the thing she'd earned, and who didn't yet understand that the people who love you conditionally will always let you sign away your own claim, smiling, and call it a gift. The paperwork explained my real role, I'll give it that. It said, in language I'd been too afraid to read, exactly what I was to that family and that business: reliable, valuable, load-bearing, and entirely replaceable in their imagination. If not, in fact. It just took me 20 years and one boring evening at the kitchen table to finally read it. And once I read it, I couldn't unknow it. And once I couldn't unknow it, I couldn't keep being it. That's the whole story. Not a war, not a courtroom, not anyone getting what they deserved in some cosmic ledger. Just a woman who spent 40 years being useful finally deciding to be a person instead, and discovering, quietly, in a rented office with her name on the door and her kids' drawings taped to the wall, that the person underneath all that usefulness had been worth something the entire time. I just wish I hadn't needed the paperwork to tell me. But I'm glad in the end that I finally read it.